everybody, how are you doing? I really miss you. And this part is a little bit special because this is the final part of Emma. Woohoo! So I'm excited for you guys to know what's gonna happen. There's a lot of drama and love in the final, and there's a lot of action that you never gonna imagine it. Trust me, dude, trust me. So yeah, let's get started the video. Oh, before that, I really want you to subscribe me because I'm tired of saying that every time. Subscribe me, guys. Turn on the red button and turn on the bell too. And yeah, share the video with your friends, and of course follow me on Instagram if you didn't follow me yet, to know each other better and to text each other. Yeah, so let's get started. I hope you did not get too wet this morning, he asked Mrs. Fairfax as they stood together in the drawing room. I only went to the post office, she replied. I go every morning to fetch the letters. When you have lived to my age, you will know that no letter is important enough to get wet for, he said. Mrs. Elton has been listening to the conversation. What is this I hear? Going to the post office in the rain? You must not do it again, she said loudly. I will not let you. I shall speak to Mr. Elton, and he will ask the man who fetches our letter to deliver yours too. Jane looked embarrassed. You are very kind, but I enjoy the walk, she said. But Mrs. Elton would not listen. My dear girl, say no more about it. It's already arranged, she said. I really cannot agree to it. There is no need to make more work for your servants, replied Jane. Emma heard all this and wondered who might be writing to Jane, but she said nothing. Dinner was ready. Emma took Jane's arm and they walked into the dinner room together as if they were the best of friends. Later, soon after the gentlemen had joined the ladies in the drawing room, Mr. Weston arrived. He had only just come home from London and then walked to Harfield. After he had spoken to all the guests, he gave his wife a letter which had been waiting at Rundle's when he arrived there. It's from Frank, he said, mostly to Mrs. Weston, although everyone in the room was listening. And he's coming here next month. The Churchills are going to stay in Richmond for a few months, only 9 miles from here, so he can be with us very soon. He says we must start planning the ball again. Mrs. Weston was very pleased, and Emma was a little surprised to feel so excited by the news. Her guests said they were looking forward to seeing Frank again. I hope you did not get too wet this morning, he asked Miss Fairfax as they stood together in the drawing room. I only went to the post office, she replied. I go every morning to fetch the letters. When you have lived to my age, you will know that no letter is important enough to get wet for, he said. Mrs. Elton had been listening to the conversation. What is this I hear? Going to the post office in the rain? You must not do it again, she said loudly. I will not let you. I shall speak to Mr. Elton, and he will ask the man who fetches our letters to deliver yours too. Jane looked embarrassed. You are very kind, but I enjoy the walk, she said. But Mrs. Elton would not listen. My dear girl, say no more about it. It's already arranged, she said. I really cannot agree to it. There is no need to make more work for your servants, replied Jane. Emma heard all this and wondered who might be writing to Jane, but she said nothing. Dinner was ready. Emma took Jane's arm and they walked into the dinner room together as if they were the best of friends. Later, soon after the gentlemen had joined the ladies in the drawing room, Mr. Weston arrived, and had only just come home from London and then walked to Harfield. After he had spoken to all the guests, he gave his wife a letter which had been waiting at Rundle's when he arrived there. It's from Frank, he said, mostly to Mrs. Weston, although everyone in the room was listening. And he's coming here next month. The Churchills are going to stay in Richmond for a few months, only 9 miles from here, so he can be with us very often. He says we must start planning the ball again." Mrs. Weston was very pleased, and Emma was a little surprised to feel so excited by the news. Her guests say they were looking forward to seeing Frank again. Mrs. Elton had never met him, but she still had something to say. "How delightful for him to come back to Highbury now. There is a few neighbors to meet," she said. Emma thought about Frank after the party and hoped that he might perhaps come back to Highbury less in love with her than before. She knew she must look carefully to see if this was true. Then she could decide how to behave. She did not have to wait long. As soon as the Churchills arrived in Richmond, Frank rode to Highbury for a day. He was certainly very pleased to see Emma, but she was sure he loved her less. He was as happy to talk and laugh as always, but after only 15 minutes at Harfield, he hurried away to see other friends in Highbury. This was his only visit for 10 days, although he wrote to Mrs. Weston and said they must now decide on the date for the ball, and he would certainly be there. The day of the ball came. Emma and Harriet travelled together to the Crown Inn and arrived just after the group from Randalls. Frank was obviously happy to be with Emma again, but he spent a lot of time walking to the door and back and listening for the sounds of their carriages. Soon some friends of Mr. Weston's arrived, then Mr. and Mrs. Elton. Somebody said it was raining, and Frank immediately went to look for umbrellas. "We must not forget Miss Bates," he said. "I will see that she does not get wet." And he went to the door and waited there. He soon came back with Miss Bates and Jane Fairfax. "So very kind," said Miss Bates. "Not enough rain to worry about, but we must think of Jane, of course." "Well," she stopped as she saw into the ballroom. "Well, this is certainly brilliant. An excellent room now that we have these wonderful lights." When everyone had arrived, Mr. Weston and Mrs. Elton led them forward for the first dance. Emma was delighted to see so many people dancing and knew she was going to enjoy the evening. But she was sad to see that Mr. Knightley did not dance. She stood with some of the older men and looked quite serious except when Emma caught his eyes, and then he smiled at her. She thought it was a pity he did not like either dancing or Frank Churchill a little better. The last two dances before dinner had almost started, and Harriet had no partner. She was the only young lady sitting down. Until then, the numbers had been equal, and Emma could not understand what had happened. But then she saw Mr. Elton walking about. He would not ask Harriet if he did not have to, and Emma thought he might be suddenly escape into the card room, but she was wrong. Mr. Elton stood in front of the place where Harriet was sitting and talked to other people, but he did not even look at her. Emma was quite near, and when Mrs. Weston came and spoke to him, she heard every word. "You are not dancing, Mr. Elton?" she asked. "I certainly will, if you will dance with me." "Me? Oh no, I was thinking of a better partner for you." "Ah, Mrs. Clibbert, well, I'm an old married man now, and my dancing days are almost over, but I will be happy to dance with her," he said. "Mrs. Clibbert does not dance, but there is a certain young lady, Miss Smith, is not dancing," Mrs. Weston explained. "Miss Smith," he said, "I did not see her. If only I were not an old married man, but I must be exhausted. Mrs. Weston, I'm afraid my dancing days are over." Mrs. Weston said no more, and Emma felt angry and upset for Harriet. She saw Mr. Elton walk away and watched him and his wife smile at each other. The next time Emma looked, she saw a happier sight as Mr. Knightley led Harriet to the dance. Emma felt very grateful to Mr. Knightley, and when she looked for Mr. Elton, she saw him going into the card room, and hoped he felt foolish. Emma did not have an opportunity to talk to Mr. Knightley until after dinner. "They wanted to hurt both of you and Harriet," he said. "Why are they your enemies?" "They could not forgive me because I wanted Mr. Elton to marry Harriet," she replied. "You were right about Mr. Elton. I made a serious mistake," she said. "I think he has made a bigger one," he replied. "Harriet has some excellent qualities, and she's very pleasant and easy to talk to, unlike Mrs. Elton." At that moment, Mrs. Weston called them into the start the dancing again. "Come, Emma, they're all lazy. You must start." "Who is your partner?" Mr. Knightley asked Emma. "You, if you will ask me," she replied. "We are not exactly brother and sister after all." "Brother and sister? Certainly not," he said. And they walked into the ballroom together. Oh, isn't that cute? The trip to Box Hill. Dancing with Mr. Knightley was one of Emma's favorite memories of the ball. She was also glad they both thought the same of Mr. and Mrs. Elton and their insults to Harriet. It seemed as if Harriet's eyes had suddenly opened at the ball, and she now saw Mr. Elton differently. Emma walked into the garden the morning after the ball and decided it would be a happy summer. Harriet out of love, Frank not too much in love, and Mr. Knightley not angry with her. Frank was not going to call at Harfield that morning because he had to go straight back to Richmond. So as Emma was just going back into the house, she was very surprised to see him coming through the guests with Harriet. Harriet looked white and frantic, and he was abusively trying to calm her. Soon they were all in the house, and Harriet immediately fainted. Emma fetched some water, and slowly Harriet became a little better and was able to tell her story. She had been out with friends, and they were walking along the Richmond Road when they suddenly met a group of gypsies. A child asked the girl for money, and they were both very frightened. Harriet's friends ran away, but before Harriet could follow her, more gypsy children arrived and were all round her. She thought if she gave them some money, they would go away. But the opposite happened, and suddenly she was surrounded by a lot of gypsies. At the moment, Frank came along the road on his way back to Richmond. He saw what was happening, saved her, and brought her to Harfield. When he was sure Harriet felt better, he continued on his journey home. In half an hour, the news was all over Highbury, and everyone heard what had happened. Mr. Knightley went with some other men to find the gypsies, but they had already gone. The story soon became unimportant, but Emma remembered how worried Frank had been about Harriet and how she had held onto his arm. She began to have stronger hopes for them both. About a fortnight later, Emma and Harriet were talking together, and Emma said something about people getting married. To her surprise, Harriet replied, "I shall never marry." "I hope this is nothing to do with Mr. Elton," replied Emma, and Harriet denied it at once. "No, of course not. It is someone much better." Emma understood at once. Harriet meant Frank Churchill, and she was unhappy because she knew He came from a very good family and could not think of marrying her. I am not surprised about this, Harriet. The way he saved you was enough to warm your heart. But you are right, you must not hope for too much. He was wonderful, Miss Woodhouse. When I remember how I felt at the time, and then I saw him coming toward me, suddenly I was happy again, said Harriet. But strange things have happened before, Harriet. You must see how he behaves with you to know how much he really likes you. We made a mistake before because we hoped for too much. This time we will be more careful and not even speak his name, said Emma. Mr. Knightley had never liked Frank Churchill, and as time went on he disliked him more. He began to think that, while Emma seemed to be his special favorite, he also had liking for Jane Fairfax. Nothing was said to make him think that, but once or twice he had seen a certain look pass between them. Emma was his dear friend, and he knew he must say something to her about it. She did not believe it at all and was amused by the idea, so he said no more, but it worried him. In June, a trip was arranged by Mrs. Elton to Box Hill, a beautiful place in the countryside. It was going to be a simple party with only one or two servants and a picnic. A few days before the trip, one of the Elton's carriage's horses hurt his leg, and they could not go. Most annoying nightly, Mrs. Elton said, "What we can do? The weather is perfect too. Come and eat my strawberries. They are ready now, and you don't need horses to travel that distance." He meant it as a joke, but Mrs. Elton thought it was a delightful idea. "Excellent," she said. "I will arrange food and guests, just to name the day." Mr. Knightley certainly did not want her to arrange anything and said he could do it himself. "Very well, I shall bring Jane and her aunts, and you can ask the other guests. We will walk around your gardens, pick strawberries, and sit under trees just like a gypsy party. It will be very pleasant." As Emma walked in Mr. Knightley's gardens on the day of the party, she saw him and Harriet standing together away from the others. She was a little surprised, but pleased to find them in conversation. She joined them, and they walked together for a time. Mr. Weston had invited Frank, but by the lunchtime he still had not arrived, and Mrs. Weston began to be worried about him. They all had lunch in the house and then afterwards went into the garden again. Still there was no sign of Frank. Emma stayed in the drawing room with Mr. Woodhouse for a time because it was too hot for him to be outdoors. She was just walking through the hall when Jane Fairfax suddenly came in through the door. She looked as if she wanted to escape from something, and she was surprised to see Emma. "Will you be so kind," she said, "when they ask about me, to say I have gone home? My aunt does not realize how long we have been here, and I think I should go back to see my grandmother now." It was a long walk to Highbury, and Emma wanted to order her carriage. But Jane did not want this. "I would like to walk," she said as she left. Not long after Frank arrived, his aunt had been ill again, he said. He was quite annoyed because he had not been at the party and Jane had already gone home. The Elton's horse was better, and they had already decided to make their trip to Box Hill the next day. "You must come with us," Emma said to Frank, who was still a little angry. At first he said he did not want to ride from Richmond again the next day, but then he changed his mind and said to her, "If you wish me to join the party, I will." It was a wonderful sunny day for the trip to Box Hill, and it should have been a happy party, but it was not. They separated too much into groups. The Eltons walked together, Mr. Knightley went with Miss Bates and Jane, and Frank looked after Emma and Harriet. Mr. Weston tried all day to make them come together, but he could not. Emma was bored. She had never seen Frank Churchill so silent and stupid. He said very little and did not seem to listen to anything she said, and Harriet was quiet because he was quiet. When they all sat down together for their picnic lunch, it was better. Frank became much happier and more amusing, and Emma thought he was trying very hard to win her heart. They talked and laughed together, although the rest of the group did not join in. "We are the only people speaking," she whispered to him. "It is silly for us to entertain several silent people. What can we do to make them talk?" whispered Frank. Then he had an idea. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm ordered by Miss Woodhouse to say that you must each say something to entertain her. You can say one very clever thing, two quiet clever things, or three very boring things, and she promises to laugh at them all." "Oh, well," said Miss Bates, "then I need not worry. I shall be sure to say three very boring things as soon as I open my mouth." Emma could not stop herself. "But three may be difficultly. You can only say three things, no more." Miss Bates did not immediately understand, but when she did, she looked very hurt and embarrassed. The others were all silent. "Ah, yes, I see what she means. I will try to not say more than three," she said quietly. Mr. and Mrs. Elton stood up and said they did not like games like that, and they were going for a walk, and soon Mr. Knightley, Jane, and her aunt followed them. Frank became louder and more annoying until he began to give Emma a headache. When the servants came to say that the carriages were ready, she was quite blessed. As Emma was waiting for her carriage, Mr. Knightley joined her. He looked around to see if they were alone, then said, "Emma, I must expect you." "How could you be so cruel to Miss Bates?" Emma remembered and was sorry but tried to laugh about it. "It was not so bad, and she probably did not understand me," she said. "She certainly did. You were very rude to her, and you have hurt her. Miss Bates is a very good woman, but you know that she is also rather silly. She is not your equal, Emma. She is not rich and clever like you, and I was ashamed of you for speaking to her like that. And it was worse because you said it in front of other people. Badly done, Emma, very badly done." Mr. Knightley walked away to his horse, and Emma climbed into her carriage. She felt angry with herself and ashamed. She thought she must say something to Mr. Knightley and looked back, but he had already gone. The journey home to Harfield did not make her feel better. Harriet was tired and silent, and as Emma remembered what she had said to Miss Bates, tears ran down her face. A secret engagement. Emma thought about the trip to Box Hill all evening. Maybe the rest of the party had enjoyed it, but she could only think of Miss Bates and how angry Mr. Knightley had been with her. She knew she had been wrong, and she was certain she would never do it again. She decided to call on Miss Bates the next morning. Emma went early, and as she walked into the room, she just had time to see Jane go out of the opposite door. "We are very happy to see you, Miss Woodhouse," Miss Bates said. Although Emma thought her voice was not quite as friendly as usual, she asked about Jane. "Poor Jane has an awful headache," she told her. "She has been writing letters all morning to the Campbells and to her other friends. We shall be so sad when she goes." "But it was a good opportunity for her, you know." Emma was surprised. "Where is Miss Fairfax going?" she asked. "To Mrs. Smallridge, 3 delightful little girls to look after, an old friend of Mr. Elton's. Jane will be just like Mrs. Weston was to you and your sister. She finally decided to go yesterday evening when we were at Mrs. Elton's house. A lovely evening with good friends. And when is she going? Very soon, within a fortnight. My dear mother does not like to think about it, said Miss Bates sadly. Emma stayed a little longer and then walked home. When she arrived, Mr. Knightley was at Harfield, and he seemed more serious than usual. I wanted to see you before I went away, Emma. I'm going to London to spend a few days with John and Isabella. I have been thinking about it for some time. Emma thought he looked as if he had not forgiven her. He stood, ready to go, but not going, and Mr. Woodhouse chose that moment to ask her how Mrs. and Miss Bates were. Mr. Knightley suddenly appeared to be pleased with her. He took her hand, and she at first thought he might kiss it, but he let it go again. Then he left immediately. Emma felt happier now that they were friends again. Her father said he had been here for half an hour, and she thought, what a pity I did not come home sooner. The next day brought news from Richmond. Mrs. Churchill, Frank's aunt, had suddenly died. Mr. and Mrs. Weston were shocked, and Emma wondered how Frank's life might change now. Perhaps he would be able to marry Harriet if he wanted to. Emma still hoped for this, but it was too soon to make any plans. Emma's first wish at this time was not for Harriet, but for Jane. She wanted to be a friend to her now, before it was too late, and she went away to Mrs. Smallridge. She wrote to her and invited her to come to Harfield for the day. Jane thanked her for her invitation, but refused. Emma heard that she was not feeling well and thought an hour or two in the countryside might help. So she offered to call in her carriage one day. Jane replied that she was not well enough to go out, but when Harriet said she had seen Jane out walking only that morning, Emma had not doubt. Jane did not want any kindness from her, and she was very, very sorry. One morning, about 10 days after Mrs. Churchill had died, Mr. Weston called at Harfield and asked Emma to go back to Randalls with him. Mrs. Weston must see you alone, he said. Emma could not guess what might be so urgent, and when they arrived, Mr. Weston left them alone together. Frank has been here this morning, said Mrs. Weston. He came to talk to his father about something, a young lady he's in love with. Emma thought first about herself, then Harriet. Frank and Jane Fairfax have been secretly engaged since they met in Weymouth last October, she said. Emma was surprised. Jane Fairfax? So they were engaged before either of them came to Highbury? And nobody knew about it. We are very upset by the way he has behaved, especially to you. Emma, we cannot excuse him for that. You need not worry about me. When we first met, I did think he was very attractive, said Emma, and I thought I was in love with him, but for the last 3 months, I have not felt at all like that. Mrs. Weston was much happier then, and called her husband into the room. It was our wish that you should love each other, and we thought you did. Since this morning we have felt very upset for you, she said. But he was very wrong. He might have made me love him. And what about Jane? She is going to Mrs. Smallridge now. He did not know about that, Emma. It was only when he found out that he decided to tell his uncle and then come here, said Mr. Weston. And Mr. Churchill was happy with the match. While Mrs. Churchill was alive, there was no hope of them marrying, but now they can. She will be a good wife for him, said Emma. I congratulate you and them. Emma now had to do a difficult thing. tell Harriet before she heard about it in Highbury. Harriet had just come home when Emma arrived. Miss Woodhouse, isn't the news very strange? What do you mean? What news? About Jane Fairfax and Frank Churchill. They have been secretly engaged and are now going to be married. I just saw Mr. Weston and he said you already knew. Harriet certainly did not look upset, and Emma did not understand it. Did you ever suspect that he loved her? Asked Harriet. Of course not. I let you hope for him. Me? I have never hoped for Frank Churchill. Harriet, what do you mean? I know we agreed not to speak his name, but I do not understand how you could have made this mistake. I spoke of someone much better than Frank Churchill. Emma sat down and tried to keep calm. Let us be very clear, Harriet. I remember you saying how you felt when he saved you from the gypsies. I'm certain I did not imagine it. At first, Harriet looked confused. Then she said, I remember the conversation, but I was thinking of something very different at the time. The night of the ball, when Mr. Elton would not dance with me, and there was no other partner in the room. Good God, cried Emma. You are speaking of Mr. Knightley? This is an awful mistake. Harriet did not think so. He is kind and sweet to me, and you said yourself, strange things have happened before. Suddenly Emma realized why it was so much worse now that Harriet was in love with Mr. Knightley and not Frank Churchill. It cut through her like a knife. She would be unhappy if Mr. Knightley married anyone except herself. The rest of the day and the next night she did not stop thinking about it. How long had she loved Mr. Knightley? How could she be so happy now without him? He has coming back to Highbury very soon, and until then Emma decided she and Harriet had better not meet. Mr. Weston visited Jane Fairfax, and she told Emma about it afterwards. She only decided to go to Mrs. Smallridge because she believed Frank was in love with you, and they could never marry. Now that she was spoken to him again, and the secret is out, she will not go. She said you were very kind to her recently when she was ill, said Mrs. Weston. I am glad she is happy now, and very sorry if I sometimes hurt her in the past, replied Emma. That evening there was a storm, and it continued all night. Emma sat quietly with her father, and it reminded her with the evening of Mrs. Weston's wedding day. Then Mr. Knightley had walked in soon after tea and made them feel happier. But everything was different now. Mrs. Weston had told Emma she was going to have a baby, so they were probably going to see less of her. Jane and Frank were getting married and might not live in Highbury, and if Mr. Knightley and Harriet married, she would also lose her two dearest friends to each other. There might not be other evenings when Mr. Knightley just walked into Harfield for the evening. Emma felt very sad and could not sleep that night. The bad weather continued next morning, but in the afternoon it stopped raining. The sun came out and it was summer again. So in the end, Mr. Knightley was in love with Harriet all this period, and he was afraid to tell her, so he told her, and she was so happy because she loved him back, and he proposed to her, and of course she accepted his offer, and they got married. And Harriet discovered finally that she's in love with Robert Morton, and they got married too. And of course, the group of friendships still happy together in Highbury, and everyone was happy in the end and got married with his love of life.